Hey there, let's go ahead and look at some harder ratio problems here. We are going to attempt to do a ratio that has three different values that are being compared, or three different groups that are being compared, as opposed to just two. So for instance, if I were looking at this problem, I have 28, a blank spot, 24, a blank spot, oops, and 5 and 6. I am going to compare the same spots in my ratios. So when I compare the first ratio to the second ratio, I'm going to compare the first number that's mentioned, 28, to the first number that's mentioned in the second ratio. And in this case, I don't know what that second one is, so I can't solve for that quite yet. So let's check the second spot, that middle spot. The middle spot compared to 5, I only have one of the two numbers, so I can't figure out what the rule is. Let's go ahead and look at the last section, 24 and 6. So I know that from the first ratio to the second ratio, I am decreasing. Decrease means to divide when you're talking about equivalent ratios and equivalent fractions. So I need to figure out what I'm dividing by. 24 divided by what equals 6? Well, if I count by sixes, I can count by sixes 4 times until I get to 24, or I could take 24 and break it into 4 equal groups, and I'll end up with 6 in each one, or I could break it into 6 groups and see that I end up with 4 in each one. Either way, I know that 4, 24, and 6 are in this fact family, so I can go ahead and realize what the rule is for this. Now, let's go back to the first section here. The very first set of groups here were 28 and a mystery number. I know now that the factor that I'm working with is 4. So I'm either increasing or decreasing by a factor of 4. So when I'm looking at 28, I'm going from 28 to some mystery number. I already know that when I'm going in this particular instance, based off of the first rule that we saw, that the first ratio is larger than the second ratio. Because of that, anytime that I'm going from the first ratio to the second ratio, I'm going to be decreasing, or I'm dividing. I'm going to divide by 4. I'm choosing 4 again because that's the number that we found we were decreasing by in the first part that we solved. 28 divided by 4 equals 7. This is where it gets interesting. We are going to be going now from the smaller ratio to the larger ratio. So we're no longer decreasing, we're going to be increasing. Increasing with equivalent ratios means to multiply. We multiply because we are working with equal groups, and the factor that we're working with, again, is still going to be 4. Now we can solve. 5 times 4 equals 20. That one was not too difficult. Let's go ahead and look at another one, just so that we can understand that a little bit better. Let's look at the ratio 45 to blank to 27, and we are comparing that to 5, 8, and blank. Again, we can look at our first groups. We can compare them, and we just so happen to have a number for each of the first groups in these ratios, so that's going to help us figure out what the rule is here, what we're increasing and decreasing by. So I can already see that from 45, changing it to 5, I'm going to be decreasing, which means I'm going to be dividing. And I know that I'm going to be dividing by 9 because 45 divided by 9 equals 5. Now, let's look at our second part. Our second part here is going from blank to 8. I don't know what that first number is, so I need to be working from the smaller ratio up to the larger ratio. So I'm going to go from 8 increase, which means multiply, to whatever my higher ratio is, or larger ratio is. Now, I know that I'm going to be multiplying by 9. I know I'm going to multiply by 9 because that is the factor, that common number that we're using here. When I multiply 8 times 9, I end up with 72. Now let's look at the next one. I know that from 27 to the last term here, I am going from the larger ratio to the smaller ratio, which means divide. 27 divided by 9 equals 3. 5 to 8 to 3, which is the last portion of our ratio, is this ratio in simplest form. Something else that you might be given just to help us understand is a problem like this. You might be asked to write a ratio in simplest form. It might be given to you like this. When you're trying to solve these, you are looking for a factor that will divide evenly into both of them. You can imagine it just like if it were a fraction that you were trying to simplify. And one way to do so, I often create a t-chart and I can write down my factors here. I know there's going to be 1 and 6, 2 and 3. I know for 9, I'm going to have 1 times 9 and 3 times 3. The highest number that is in both of these is 3. So I'm going to divide both the first term and the second term by 3. 6 divided by 3 is 2, and 9 divided by 3 is 3. This is going to be your ratio in simplest terms. You might also